Okay. All right. Piali no mo machtikawan namanti itstoke nikan wanti mo machtise tlenika tle tla wan mo. Hi everyone. Today we're here and we're going to be learning the prefixes te, tla, and mo. Okay, these three prefixes that I'm going to show you, they all have to do with who is the person receiving the action. So there are certain situations in which those six situations last time that I told you where certain people receive the action. Well, these prefixes, they kind of expand to include other people that you might want to do an action to, even though you'll see that some of these prefixes indicate unknowns. Okay, so you learned 2 lectures ago that niknotsa means I call out to him, right? And so if you remember from the past, I told you that nota was a transitive verb meaning that this verb always requires you to indicate an object. So you have to indicate who you're doing the action to. So if you remember, I taught you this sentence, Nancy nechnotsa, Nancy calls out to me. Nancy meets notsa, Nancy calls out to you. Nancy ki notsa, Nancy calls out to him or her or it. And basically these were the 6 prefixes that you learned last 2 weeks ago. Okay? And basically you have to do these over and over again, and eventually you'll just know them by doing them many, many times. But in Nahuatl, when you say Nancy ki notsa, that particle ki is indicating who's receiving the action, and in this case it's he, she, or it. However, there are certain, that picture didn't load. Okay, however, there are certain situations where you don't know who's receiving the action, or you don't care who's receiving the action, or you don't necessarily want to indicate who it is that's receiving the action because it's unimportant in the sentence. Or, okay, so in that case, you're going to use the prefix te. So here we have Nancy te notsa. And in this case, te is for an unknown person. So here we're saying Nancy calls out to someone. Okay. Let's say Nancy goes to the store, she meets this guy, and she buys something from this guy. So we would say Nancy kiko William. Nancy buys something from him, buys from him, basically. Kiko William means she buys from him. Okay, Nancy kikowilia. So this verb kowilia comes from the verb kowa, which means to buy, but this kowilia makes it mean to buy from. So Nancy kikowilia means she buys it from him. The ki is referring to him. But let's say we don't know who she bought it from, or we don't care who she bought it from. We just want to say that she bought from someone. We would say Nancy te kowilia. Nancy buys from someone. Nancy buys from someone. So that's where we put this verb, this prefix te. Another example, if I know this is, Nancy got younger all of a sudden, but we're going to keep consistent with the girl Nancy or woman Nancy or whoever, Basically, Nancy kipalewea would be Nancy helps him in this situation. Nancy helps him. But if we want to say Nancy helps someone and we don't care who it is, we would say Nancy te palewea. Okay, so basically this prefix te is a prefix that is for unknown people or an unknown person. So we say Nancy, you could say ni te notsa, I call out to someone. Ti te notsa, you call out to someone. Te notsa, he or she calls out to someone. Remember, there's no prefix here. Ti te notsa, we call out to someone. In te notsa, y'all call out to someone. And te notsa, they call out to someone. Okay. So you're probably thinking, wait a minute, Diego, like when is there even a situation in which I don't know who I'm calling, or I don't know who I'm talking to or calling out to? Well, like I said, there are certain situations where it doesn't really matter, or you just want to say that you're calling someone and not saying exactly who. So for example, if you had a job and you were a secretary, or you had a job where you constantly have to call out to people, that's when somebody could ask you something like, "Tlen tichiwa ipan moteki." What do you do at your job? And you would say, "Ni te notza." I call people, or I call out to people. And so that's a situation in which you don't necessarily want to or care to indicate who it is that you're calling, but this verb notza requires you to always indicate who you're doing the action to. But since in that situation, it doesn't really matter who you're calling, you're just saying that you call out to people in general, that's the situation where you would need this te prefix. Okay. Also, if you don't necessarily want to say who you're calling, you just want to say I called somebody, then this is another situation where you would say ni te notza. Okay. So I want to point out that this prefix te, it can indicate one person, so it can mean I call out to someone, or it can indicate multiple people. I call out to people. Or it can mean I call out in general, to people in general, and we don't know who those people are. Like in the situation of where you call out to people at your job because that's your job, then you're just talking about doing this action in general. But since this verb notza is a transitive, you must always indicate who is receiving the action. That's the situation where you would put this te. So in other words, for notza and any other transitive verb, you must indicate something, and you would not be able to grammatically correctly say ni notza. Ni notza would not be correct. It has to have something there in the middle. Something must take its place. Okay? So this ni te notza, it can mean I call someone, I call people, or I call in general. Okay. So you've met other transitive verbs. So another transitive verb that you ran into is the verb tlazotla, which means to love. And you see that space that I put in front of the verb tlazotla indicates that this verb is transitive and there must always be an object there. So you will never find tlazotla just by itself. The only time you'll find it by itself like that is in the dictionary. But other than that, in the wild, it's going to have something in front of it. You're going to have to indicate what it is that you're loving. Okay, so that verb is transitive, must always have an object, always. Okay, so when you learned in the past, when people ask me how to say I love you, I say, oh, it means you say ni meets tlazotla. So in that case, when you're saying ni meets tlazotla, the object is you. You're the one receiving the object, and this verb, tlazotla is a transitive verb, and so by putting the you there, we're fulfilling the requirement of putting an object. But if you want to say I love, or I love someone, or I love in general, or I love people, then you would have to put this te there to fulfill the requirement of putting an object there. So you would say ni te tlazotla. I love someone, I love people, I love in general. And so if you don't know what you should be putting there, you should put either te or tla. And so we'll talk about tla after this, but basically you have to put something there. Now, what does not allow you to not put something there? You must put something there. Okay. So these are, again, the 6 ways to say I call out to someone. And so sometimes people ask me, hey, Diego, is there a separate word to say someone in Nahuatl? And then the answer to that is yes, there is a separate word to say someone in Nahuatl, and that word is se acajia. Se acajia means someone. Remember, se means one, and acajia is like somebody. So se acajia means someone. So if you want to say I call out to someone, you could do this other way of saying ni te notza, or you could say niknotza se acajia, where this k is taking the place of the object, and that k is referring to the noun se acajia. Niknotza se acajia, I call out to somebody. So in other words, this k or the ki is going to take place of the object. And so as you can tell, notza always has an object. If you don't know why the key is here, go back 2 lectures ago and find out why there's a key there and not a k. But obviously you can't say k notza, so it's much easier to say ki notza. Ki notza se acajia. Okay, so essentially, if you're gonna use se acajia as a standalone word with a transitive verb, you must indicate that k there to indicate that there's an object. So literally in Nahuatl, you're saying, I call out to it or him or her, and then who it is se acajia. If we were to replace this here, like I call out to Diego, I would still say niknotsa Diego, where the k is indicating that there's an object that is him or her, and that object is Diego. Or here it's se acajia. So you must always put something there. You can't leave it, like I like to say, naked. Don't leave it naked. Okay. So if you don't know whether a verb is transitive or intransitive, go back to lectures or go to last week's lecture where I told you how to look words up in the dictionary so that you can find out whether they're transitive or intransitive. If they require an object on the definition, it's going to say nik. And if they don't require an object, it's going to say ni in the definition, or just look at the chart that I gave you 2 weeks ago, and you'll see a little space there indicating that you must put an object there. All right, so now I'm going to ask you a series of questions of kenihimoia. How do you say? Okay, so you can unmute yourself, and if you don't know these verbs, go look at your chart or go look at them up in the dictionary. So find out how to say, I help you. I help you.
Moilia nimits palewia.
Kuali, kuali. Moilia nimits palewia, okay? So I'm glad you know that verb. Kuali. Kenihki moilia, I help someone. I help someone.
Moilia nite palewia.
Kuali. Moilia nite palewia. Kuali. Okay, cool. So you just insert the te instead of the meats, right? Kenihki moilia, I help people.
Moilia nite palewia.
Kuali, So it's the exact same thing, because nite palewia can be I help someone, or it can mean I help people. So it doesn't really change. And lastly, if you say I help people, if I help in general, how would you say kenihki moilia ikanawat?
Nitla palewia.
Okay, I see. All right. You probably could say ni tla palewia. That would be like I help in general. I'll accept that. In this case, I was gonna accept ni te palewia, because if you look at the definition of palewia, it says to help someone. But I believe ni tla palewia is still acceptable because it means I help with things, which is the same thing as saying I help in general. So I'll accept ni tla palewia, and I've seen tla palewia as out there. It's like, for example, you say the noun help, it's tlapalewilistli, where that tla is there. Okay, cool. So then obviously you already understand this. Quali. Okay. Keniki molia ikanawat, I follow her. I follow her. If you don't know this verb, go look it up in the dictionary.
Miktoka.
You're using the verb toca. Let me double check that verb. Because it's related to this one, but I need to 100% make sure you're using that correctly. I use the verb tepotztoca. Nik tepotztoca, but let me double check, because there could be multiple answers to that. Nik tepotztoca. Let me see. Because as far as I know, toca could mean to bury somebody, or toca could mean to plant something. And so that's why I want to make sure that it doesn't have a third definition, meaning to follow. So if you say niktoka, I think you might be saying I buried her, which, by the way, is not, it can be used that way, but in a different meaning. I'll just put it to you like that. Okay. Let's find out toca. Sembrar algo, seguir algo. Okay, all right, yeah. So that is one of the definitions. Sembrar algo, enterrar a un muerto, to plant something, to bury a dead person. Okay, I did find seguir a algo, to follow something, with the verb toca, with a word from Guerrero. So in Guerrero, they might say ni toca to mean I follow her. In Huasteca, we say ni tepotztoca. And when I'm looking at the definition of toca in Huasteca, in Huasteca, they say totoca. They say totoca. So in Guerrero, they say nik toca to mean I follow her. In Huasteca, they say nik totoca or nik tepotztoca. So both of those are acceptable. Saying nik toca in the Huasteca region, it actually means something different. It has like a sexual meaning. So that's why I didn't want you to necessarily just use that. But I guess in Guerrero, they do use it to mean I follow her. But we're going to use tepotztoca to not cause confusion, although you could have also said nik totoca. And nik totoca apparently is acceptable in Huasteca to mean I follow her. Okay? Kenihki moilia y Nahuatl, I follow people.
Ni tepotztoca.
Kuali. Ni tepotztoca. Ni tepotztoca. Kuali. I follow people. Kuali. All right. So now we're going to talk about tla. So we could say that David goes to the store and David kikoa tlacuali. David buys food, where kikoa, the ki is referring to the food. It's saying David buys it, and this it that it's referring to is the tlacuali. So now what, you still have to indicate the object here. But what if it doesn't really matter what he bought, and you just want to say that he bought stuff, or he bought in general, or David buys, sorry, not bought, because this is buys. So David tlacoa is how you would say it, where this tlacoa means things. So literally, and now what you're saying, David tlacoa, David buys things. And that's why I replaced the picture with this picture of things. Vague things, we don't know what those things are, okay? Another example would be if we have this guy who I'm calling Raul, I don't know his real name to be honest. Raul kinamaka alashosh. Raul sells oranges. Raul kinamaka alashosh. So this ki is referring to these oranges, because remember, alashosh can mean one orange or it can mean many oranges. So Raul kinamaka alashosh. So if we don't necessarily care what Raul sells, because maybe we ask Raul, Tlentich chiwa ipan moteki, what do you do at your work? And he just says, well, nitlanamaka, I sell things. So in this case, it doesn't really matter what he sells, or he doesn't care to tell you what he sells. He would just say, nitlanamaka, I sell things, I sell stuff. This tla comes from the word tlamantli. The word tlamantli in Nahuatl means things. So this is like a shorter version of saying things. So Raúl Tlanamaka is literally Raúl sells things. Okay, you could use this tla or this te whenever it requires an object, but tla means to see things, or to do an action to things in general. Here I'm using the verb ita, and I'm saying ni tla ita, I see things, okay? So this tla, it can refer to anything. It can refer to things, it can refer to animals, it can even refer to people. So this tla prefix can indicate that that you're doing an action to people, but usually when we're doing an action to people, we'll indicate it with te. But there are certain situations where people are included in that action. So for example, when I say I see things, I could be seeing people, I could be seeing things, I could be seeing animals, I could be seeing a mixture of people, animals, and things, but I would still say ni tlaita, because tla is more general. It can include people, but it doesn't necessarily include people, whereas te always includes people. Okay, so if you say ni tlaita, you're saying I see things. Maybe it's people, maybe it's not. But if you say ni teita, you're saying I see people. Okay, specifically people. We don't know who they are. It could be someone, it could be one person, two people, three people. We don't know. Same thing with tla. It could be one thing. It can be many things. It could be things in general. So it doesn't make a difference with tla. Tla ni tlaita can be translated as I see something, I see things, or I see, just I see in general. Okay. So, so if we can say the sentence Raúl tlanamaca, Raúl sells things. But if we wanted to use a standalone word, like just one word, we could also say Raúl kinamaca tlamantli. This is like the long way to say the exact same thing over here. Raúl sells things. This is the same thing. Raúl kinamaca, Raúl sells things. Remember, the word for things is tlamantli. So now what does have a standalone word, but I personally prefer tlanamaca because it's faster. Okay, so if you ask me, hey, Diego, how do you say I eat in Nahuatl? Well, if you go and look up in the dictionary, you're going to find that when it says eat, it's just going to say qua. It's not going to say ni tlacua for eating, right? But you, who are a smart Nahuatl student, and you now know how to use the dictionary, you're going to see that under qua, it says nik. And so when you see that it says under qua, that it says nik, then you know that you must put an object there. So when you say I eat, if it doesn't, when you say I eat, you're not specifying what you're eating. Well, now what still requires you to put the object. So you're going to say ni tlacua, because the tla is taking the place of whatever it is that you're eating. So you're literally saying I eat things, but it can be understood as just I eat. So let's say they say, hey, what are you doing? Tlentis chiwa. And then you're like, well, ni tlacua, I'm eating. But it doesn't really matter what you're eating. You just want to tell them, hey, I'm eating. So but now what will still require you to say ni tlacua. Now, in theory, you could also say niqua, N-I-C-C-U-A, niqua, but that means something different. If you say niqua with the extra C, you're saying I eat it, or I eat it. So therefore, in that case, you would probably have to specify what you're eating, because that's what they would understand to say that you're eating it, but they'd be like, well, what are you eating? Unless it's already part of the context of what you're talking about, then they would probably ask you like, well, what tlenticua, what are you eating? Okay? Or tlentitlacua, what are you eating in general? Well, they would probably say tlenticua, because the k is referring to the exact thing that you're eating. Okay? So this nitlacua means I'm eating something, I'm eating things, I'm eating in general, or I eat in general. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. I'm going to ask you, Kenihki moilia ikanawat. Okay, so Kenihki moilia ikanawat, we see him.
Moilia tiquita.
Tiquita. Oh, I see. You added the extra I in there, huh? Okay. You would add that extra I in there if it was just kiita. So they would say kiita. But when it's tiquita, we get rid of that extra I, because I'm not exactly sure why Huastecanawa does that, but with us, tiquita, that extra I does go away. And it's because this I is here, but you're right. In he or she sees him, it would be kiita, and we would write the extra I, but here we don't. Okay, we see him. Quali. Kenihki moilia y kanawat, we see someone.
Moilia ni te ita.
Quali, moilia ni, oh, not ni, ti.
Sorry, tite ita.
I like made an assumption you got it right, but it was really tite ita, quali. Tite ita. And we see things.
Moilia titla ita.
Titlaita. Quali. We see things. So now the only difference is we added a there. Quali. He forgets her. He forgets her. Or she forgets him, or she forgets her, or he forgets him. All of those are actually the same. in Nahuatl. Or he forgets it, or she forgets it. All of those are the same in Nahuatl. Kenihi moilia.
Moelia ki matikawa.
Huh. That matikawa, I haven't heard that verb before, but it does make sense. Matikawa would mean let go of knowing something. But let me look it up. Maybe is that a classical verb? I haven't heard it, or is this a Huasteca verb?
That verb that I grabbed was from the Learning Nahuatl book. That's one of the dictionaries I have up, and that was the first one I typed in.
Okay, Learning Nahuatl, meaning is it one of the apps that I recommended or no?
No, this is the Jan Garcia's book.
Matikawa. So it probably is Huasteca Nahuatl, and that's probably a different way to say it. Let me find out for you. See, I also consult the dictionary all the time. Let's find out. Matikawa makes sense. It literally means to let go of knowing something. So, but my dictionary is not loading.
I have 3 different dictionaries up, and that was the first one that I typed in.
Yeah, Matikawa. Really? Matikawa. It doesn't pop up in my dictionary, but it kind of makes sense. I use the word ilkawa, which is the more common word, but matikawa, I'm not sure if it might be. It could be. I don't find it in my dictionary, but that probably that might be okay. Matikawa. Mati. Okay. I'm not sure about matikawa, but ilkawa for sure means to forget. Okay, so he forgets her or him. It would be ki ilkawa. That other verb I have to look up. Okay. Keniki moelia, he forgets people.
Tequilcagua.
Okay, so if you say tikilkawa, the k is indicating that he forgets him, her, or it. But in this case, we're not saying him, her, or it. If you put the k there, that's what you're indicating. Instead, we want to indicate people in general. Unless I heard you wrong. I don't think I did though. So this would be te ilkawa. I don't know if I heard you wrong or not, but te ilkawa. So here would be te, here. I'm sorry, the he, there is no prefix, right? He does it to someone or to people. So put te, and the verb is ilkawa. So it'd be te ilkawa. Okay?
You're correct. I did add the C.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. And then he forgets things. He forgets things. Oh, and the reason you can't put the k there is because it means he, she, or it, but also the te already takes place of who is receiving the action. So you're like kind of being redundant by saying tek ilkawa. Because the te already says, oh, this action is being done to people. So that's why you would not put a k there. Keniki moelia, he forgets things.
Moelia tla ilkawa.
Wali, tla ilkawa. So when he or she does an action, there's no prefix, but he does the action to things, and the verb is forget. So tla ilkawa. Wali. He forgets in general. He's a forgetful person. He forgets in general. Straight up, this is the story of my life. I'm not a very, I live by reminders. I'll put it to you like that. I have reminders all the time on my phone. So you might use this on me all the time. Thankfully, I have a computer at work. So it constantly prompts me to do things and I don't forget. But in my day-to-day life, woo, you better hope my technology is working. Lifelong problem. Okay, so this one would be tlailkawa. It is exactly the same as the other one. So when you say he forgets things or he forgets in general, well, when you're saying he forgets, but you're just saying in general, now what requires you to put an object there. So you would say he forgets things, but it could also translate as he forgets in general. But since this verb ilkawa is a transitive verb, you must indicate what is receiving the action. So that's why we're putting the tla there. Okay, last, I think this is the second to last. I don't remember which verb this is. So you believe me. You do an action to me and the action is believing. So go look up the verb for believe.
Moelia nimis nel toca.
¿Cuál? Oh no, not ni meets. Sorry, you flipped them backwards.
I'm sorry.
Teenage. So this is where you flipped it. So you are doing the action, and I'm the one receiving the action. What you did ni meets is I'm doing the action and you're receiving the action. So you have to keep those straight. And I actually made an error too. So. Anyways, you believe me, you are doing the action to me. It's tinech nel toca. Tinech nel toca. ¿Cuál? But if you want to say I believe, you believe someone, you would say ikanawat kenihki moilia.
Moelia ti te nel toca.
Nel toca.
¿Cuál? Tite nel toca. Toca. ¿Cuál? You believe something.
Titlan el toca.
Titlan el toca. ¿Cuál? So this could be you believe something. It could be you believe in, well, I'm going to tell you, it means you believe in general. So like if they say, do you believe? They would probably ask you, titlan el toca, do you believe? But literally they're asking you, do you believe things? But it can also be translated as, do you believe? Okay, so these prefixes, te and tla, you can combine them together depending on what verb. Now, not all the time does it make sense to combine them together. But there are situations when you can combine them together. And those situations are when the verb can take two objects. So there are certain verbs where you're doing the action, but then there's the secondary object that you're doing the action to something with. Okay, so let me give an example. So like if I take Maria a book, Maria is receiving the action. She's receiving the action of taking, but the thing that I'm taking to her is a book. So there are two objects, Maria and the book. So those verbs that can take two objects because you're doing an action to two objects, a primary object and a secondary object, those verbs can take te and tla together. So here I give you a progression of when that could happen. So here I have the verb wikilia. Wikilia means to take something to someone. So I say ni, I, k, to her, wikilia, I take to her, nikwikilia, Maria, I take to Maria, amoshli, I take a book to Maria. So it'd be nikwikilia, Maria, amoshli. So Maria is the first object, amoshli is the second object, okay? But I can generalize this and say, instead of saying I take it to Maria, I could just say I take a book to someone, or I take a book to people. And in that case, I would say ni te wikilia. Ni te wikilia. Okay, so ni te wikilia, I take something to people, and that something that I take is amoshli. So ni te wikilia amoshli, I take a book to people or to someone. We don't know who because it's te. All right, but if you wanted to combine these together, you could say ni te tla wikilia, and this would mean I take things to people. We don't know what things and we don't know who, but you could say that whole sentence in Nahuatl as I take things to people as ni te tla wikilia. Okay, there's a lot of variations of how we could do that, but that's the most succinct way to do it. Ni te tla wikilia. So you can do that in Nahuatl. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the last prefix, which is moita. The prefix is mo. And here I have osomatli, moita. So what he's doing is moita. Okay, you also probably remember from a long time ago where we had this picture of I, na, and then you could say na ni moita. Okay, so if you notice from this whole trend, this mo is indicating an action being done to yourself, to self. Okay, so in other words, if you want to say I see myself, you would say ni mo ita. I do this action, and this action I do it to myself. So be ni mo ita. You want to say you see yourself, it'd be ti moita. He or she sees himself, it'd be moita, like in the example of the monkey, moita. Osomatli moita, the monkey sees itself, or him or herself. I guess I don't know if they have gender, or I guess they do. I don't know. Anyways, ti moita, we see ourselves. In moita, y'all see yourselves, and moita, they see themselves. Okay, this mo, when it's plural, when you're saying more than one person do an action to themselves, it can mean two things. So for example, we could have a mirror, a gigantic mirror, and we're like in a group and we're all standing in line, right? And we're all looking at this mirror, and in this mirror, we all see ourselves in that mirror. That's one translation for mo in the context of more than one person. But this mo can also have a different meaning, which is doing an action to each other. So instead of us being standing in a line, let's say we're standing in a circle and we are looking at each other. I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, he is looking at her, she's looking at him, etc., etc. So in that case, when we're all in a group and we're doing the action to each other, that mo also means that. So for example, if you were to say ti mo palewia, we, it would translate as we help each other. That's the each other part, it's the mo. Okay, it could also mean we help ourselves. Like we are all like, I don't know, I guess, we all got to get up somewhere or something and we help ourselves to get up. I don't know exactly. But it can mean that we're doing it to ourselves or that we're doing it to each other. Okay, that's what mo means in this context. I wanted to point out not to do this, which I'm about to point out. Do not do this. Okay, so I know that for a long time I told you who's doing the action, who's receiving the action. Okay, for the most part, those rules work, except when you're doing the action to yourself or the person is doing the action to themselves. When you do the action, when the person does the action to themselves, that's when you're going to use mo. But so in other words, if I want to say I see myself, I am not going to say ni nech ita, even though it does make logical sense. In Nahuatl, that is not grammatically correct. You would not say ni nech ita, you would say ni mo ita. Not ti mitzita, but ti moita. Not ki moita, but moita. Not ti techita, but ti moita. Not in mechita, but in moita. Not ki moita, but moita. So do not do this. This will not work. And I just put it in there to prevent you from making the problem because I know you're going to make it. Okay, so in summary, basically these prefixes all tell you who is receiving the action, but there are certain situations where you don't necessarily want to indicate who is receiving the action or what is receiving the action. In those cases, you're going to use te and tla. There are other situations where it doesn't really matter who's receiving the action, but that verb still requires you to put something, and that something is the te, the tla, or the mo, depending on what you're trying to say. Mo is an action being done to yourself. So in other words, this mo makes a verb reflexive, meaning the action is being done to the same person who's performing the action. This is very similar to Spanish se, hablarse, caminarse, like levantarse. That se is the reflexive in Spanish. Well, the mo is the reflexive in Nahuatl. Now, there are some certain verbs that are reflexive in Spanish that are not reflexive in Nahuatl, verbs that are reflexive in Nahuatl that are not reflexive in Spanish, etc., etc. The truth is, you truly don't know whether a verb is reflexive or not reflexive until you look it up in the dictionary. And in the dictionary, it's going to say ni mo. If it says ni mo, that means that verb is reflexive. And in order to have that meaning, you must put mo there. Okay? Okay, so for example, I'll give you an example. There's the verb siahkawa, which means to rest. Siahkawa literally means to let go of your tiredness. But if you look up siahkawa in the dictionary, it's going to say to rest. But right before that, it's going to say ni mo. See, and then you're going to be like, okay, if I want to say I rest, I need to say ni mo siahkawa. I let my tiredness go to myself. And see, that verb doesn't make sense in Spanish or English, but they put mo there. And so it doesn't always correspond to the Spanish or English. Next week, we're going to learn prepositions. What does preposition means? If you don't remember from grammar, it means like on top of, behind, to the side, etc., etc. And you'll see that some of these prefixes, the te and the tla, and no, moto, y, etc., those are all used in prepositions. So that's what we're going to learn next week. So I want to say tla sakamatiniak. And anyone who has donated money, and I'll leave it up to Tlatlanilistli. Any questions? Or did I do a good job at explaining?
You did a good job.
Quali. I guess this whole session, the last 3 sessions, nobody really had questions, which means I'm doing an okay job. That means people understand it. My goal is to make these straightforward enough that I'm not confusing you, because trust me, I broke this lecture up into like 2 or 3 lectures because this is something that people generally don't understand clearly. And I think for once I made it so clear that nobody has questions. Main things that people mess up is they switch the person doing the action and the person receiving the action. Make sure not to do that. People also always put ni nech, ti meets. Like I told you, don't do that. But the te and the tla, I think those are pretty self-explanatory. And you'll see that tla is basically everywhere. If you look up a lot of verbs, you're going to see tla there, because tla means things. And so it's inside of a lot of verbs. And even inside of nouns, because there's a lot of nouns in Nahuatl that are derived from verbs. And those verbs that are transitive require you to put the word tla. So if you saw the word that we've been learning for questions, the word is tlatlanilistli. Well, that word tlatlanilistli, notice it starts with tla. Okay, so that tlatlanilistli is coming from the verb tlanilia, which tlanilia means to ask somebody for something. Okay, so tlatlanilistli is literally saying to ask, the action of asking people for things, which is basically what a question is. That's why tlatlanilistli means question. All right. Te siahkawa, everyone rest? No. Okay, so te siahkawa, it is not everyone rest. There's 2 issues with this. You need to think about who is receiving the action and who is doing the action. When you say people are, when you're talking about people in general doing an action, that is not what te is. Te is when people are receiving an action. So when you're saying everybody rest, first, you would have to say everybody would be nochime. So, okay, so the word for everybody is nochime. And so you're saying everybody is doing something. It would be nochime mo siahkawa. Nochime means everyone. So that's the one that's actually doing the action, the word nochime. And mo is required with that verb siahkawa. Siahkawa is a transitive verb. So to say everyone rests, it would be nochime mo siahkawa. I want to clarify, te is not people receiving the people doing the action. Te is people receiving the action. So no, you cannot say te siahkawa. Te siahkawa would translate to something like people are being rested, and it doesn't even make sense because you need to put the mo there. So no, you cannot say te siakawa. And if you did, it would be like people are being rested by other people. Como descansados. I guess in Spanish it could make sense. Los descansan. But it would probably be not siakawa, it would probably be siakawilia. Te siakawilia. And I know you don't understand what lia means yet, you eventually will. And trust me, that's when Nahuatl gets crazy. But if you want to tell people to rest, like, hey, everyone, you should rest, like as a command, you would say, she, that's the command part, she mo siahkawakan. She mo siahkawakan. Hey, basically, y'all rest, like as a command. You want to say, all of you do this. Inochime shimo siahkawakan. Shimo siahkawakan. That's a command, like, hey, do this. And you must put the mo there for mo siakawa. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure siakawa requires a mo. Siakawa. Yes, it does. So I looked it up. Descansar, or to rest. And now what? It says nimo, and it says to rest. So in other words, to say to rest, you do not say ni siakawa because that verb requires a mo. So you would say ni mo siakawa. So look up every verb, new verb that you run into, you should always look up if it's a nik, if it's a ni, or if it's a nimo verb, meaning who you need to indicate that is receiving the action. And I know at the very beginning it's like overwhelming, but basically I know now every time that I look up, that I find a new verb, I always look up what kind of verb it is, and I always look up what class verb it is. Now, you haven't learned what classes are yet, but eventually when we learn the past tense, you'll know why the class matters. But for our purposes, just know that some verbs require an object, those are the nik. Some of them are reflexive, those are the nimo verbs. And then some verbs don't require an object, those are the ni verbs. Okay?
So every time we're looking up the personal lexicon dictionary,
yes.
And for example, like that word, I see it says nemo, so then we always know there's a mo attached to it.
Yes. Well, yes. So if you look it up in personal lexicon, yeah. Now I understand that you don't know what it says right there. It says masewali moseguia pampatlawel. Like it doesn't tell you, right? But you see in the English translation says descansar, to rest. And there's only really one definition here, right? So that tells you that this verb nemo, that to mean that definition of to rest, you must put mo there, okay? So yes, in personal lexicon, it says that. Now, if you want to know what this translation actually says in English, where I know it says right there, siakawa tlach, which tells you it's a verb, class 2, tlachiwalisli 2, nimo. It says masewali mosewia, a person sits down, pampa, because tlawel quatitok. I think that means siatok. I think there might be a typo there. Siatok means that person is tired. Keman kichiwa setlamantli, when that person does something. But if you want to find out what that actual translation, go into the Totlato Nahuatl app, the mobile app, and these translations are exactly the translations that are in the Totlato Nahuatl app, except they'll be in Spanish and English.
Ashton.
Okay. It would be Tlazokamati, and then I would say Ashton, but whatever.
Sorry, I got it backwards again.
Yeah.
Tlazokamati.
It's okay. It happens. It's like when people say, oh, like instead of excuse me, they say please or whatever. Whatever. It is what it is. Okay. Or when people tell me tlenkitos neki when they mean kenihki moilia. They're asking me what does it mean, but they're really trying to say, how did you say? They like mix those. It happens.
Well, I want to say, I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving. It's nice that you moved in before this holiday, you know, and at least you're settled. And it's kind of nice. And I'm glad that you're happy about where, you know, that's pretty cool. So.
I got lucky. I got very lucky, not gonna lie. I got lucky. Because the place that I found is like perfect and I'm so happy with it. But for 3 months, I was semi-homeless since like August. August 17th. I've been semi-homeless. Moving from place to place. So I'm finally settled and I'm finally paying rent and it's good. And I don't plan on moving anymore.
Cool.
Unless something
Cool.
crazy happens. Or I buy a house, then okay. Then we're moving. Or I get kicked out, which I hope not.
Oh, no, that won't happen.
This time I don't think so. Last
Well,
time.
happy holidays.
All right, Tlazokamati Miak. Yeah. Tlazokamati Fiera. Timoitase Chicuelillo, we'll see each other in a week. We'll learn prepositions. And Tlazokamati Inochime. Thank you all.
Tlazokamati timoitase.
Timoitase.
Tlazokamati.
Piali.